Today, we're going to talk about something that has really exploded over the last few years. And honestly, it's created, I think, a lot of confusion with people, and that's at-home blood testing. You see ads everywhere, the convenience of sticking it on your shoulder or just doing a finger prick, and you dab it on, a piece of paper. It's like test hormones from home, check your testosterone without leaving your couch, measure your biological age, all that stuff. And let's be honest, nobody loves getting their blood drawn, right? So it's an attractive solution. And nobody likes scheduling appointments or leaving their house. So the idea of like poking your finger, putting a few drops of blood on a card, or sticking a mechanism on your shoulder and then mailing it off and getting all your results sounds fantastic. Now, the problem is, in a lot of cases, some things are too good to be true, and that convenience and accuracy are not always the same thing. And what I've started seeing is people are making some of their major health decisions about regarding data that may not be giving them the whole picture. I've had guys approach me with, pricing that's a lot cheaper and more convenient with these at-home tests. And I've seen people like stop supplements and medications and change their medications and completely change health strategies based on these results. And when I looked into this, I was surprised to see that they're actually not as reliable as they think. So what I want to do today is I want to discuss finger prick testing and what it actually is, where it actually can work well, where it seems to fall apart, and why venous blood draws are still considered the gold standard when you're trying to understand what's going on under the hood. Because making decisions specifically about hormones, longevity, metabolism, performance health, recovery, etc., and disease, you need to understand the quality of the information you're working with. As the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out, right? So let's get into it. What most people don't realize is that blood isn't just blood. So if the lab is measuring your testosterone, then, testosterone's testosterone, right? So not exactly. When you go to a lab and you have your blood drawn from your arm, from venous blood, right? So they're tapping into a vein in your arm and they're getting direct venous blood from your body. That's what physicians use and labs use, specialists use, and it's almost where every reference range is built around. So that's what's standardized and controlled and collected the same way every time. And compare that to a finger prick, for example. A finger prick doesn't collect pure venous blood. What you're getting is a mixture of what's called capillary blood, which is more towards the surface of the skin, which is small amounts of arterial blood, venous blood, and potentially extracellular fluid, right? So tissue fluid. And like, for example, if the finger gets squeezed too much, and people do this all the time, you can actually contaminate the sample with interstitial fluid from surrounding tissues. So right away, you're starting with a completely different sample. And again, I want to just preface by saying it's not totally useless, but it's different. And what you're going to introduce is more variables and more opportunity for error. So one of the things I like to talk about all the time is reducing variables and trying to simplify things when you're trying to make important decisions. Clearly, the more variables that you have, the harder it is to know what is actually true. So the example I'll give is like weighing yourself. So if you weigh yourself randomly throughout the day, like let's say you do it after you ate a couple meals or after you worked out or first, before you go to bed, with different amounts of clothing on, different scales, your data becomes way too noisy. And blood work is no different, right? Traditional venous blood draw is highly standardized. So in my case, we always draw in the morning, fasted, okay? Preferably within 2 hours of waking up. And we have professional collection, controlled tubes, controlled processing, controlled storage, temperature, optimization for transportation. And it's a very controlled process. So we're comparing apples to apples, generally speaking, when we're assessing data. And we have the more confidence we have in the results too. Finger prick testing introduces variability at almost every step, right? So, the user that collects the sample is usually, yourself, determines how much blood is being collected, how the sample's handled, how quickly it gets shipped, the shipping methods, the time of delivery, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to tell you that what I've discovered is what finger prick testing actually can do well is that there's like blood glucose, for example. That's probably the most obvious example, right? So millions of diabetics monitor glucose using the finger prick methods in like every single day, right? It's been around forever. Hemoglobin A1C, which is about a 90 to 120 day snapshot of your blood sugar regulation, can correlate reasonably well as well. And they found that even some lipid markers can be fairly reliable. Genetic testing, infectious disease screening, stuff like that performs pretty well. But if your goal is broad screening, trend tracking, and like other stuff like hormones, metabolic testing, etc., then this is where it becomes a bit more blurry. So if an at-home test, gets someone engaged in their health who otherwise would never do anything, I consider that a win. But the problem starts when people assume that every biomarker performs equally well, because in fact, what research shows is they don't. So I'll use hormones as the example, because, this is what I speak about quite often. This is what, with Weaponized Wellness, we're doing an intensive focus along with your other global physiology to make sure we're optimizing hormones, particularly as you get older. So here's the truth is that hormones exist in very small concentrations in your blood, and many hormones fluctuate naturally throughout the day. So your testosterone, your estradiol, cortisol, progesterone, DHEA, etc. And all of these can be influenced by collection methods, timing, handling, and of course the testing technology. And when we're looking at testosterone, for example, like the difference between, say, like a 200 to a 500 level can be, significantly change the conversation with the individual. Same thing with like the difference between like 600 to 900, right? So, and for women, the difference between, say, like 10 and 30, it can matter very much. So imagine you're trying to measure these small differences using like a tiny, tiny blood sample collected at home by someone who's never done it before. And you can see how the challenges arise, right? And it becomes more problematic when people are looking for hormone optimization, like testosterone optimization therapies, menopause management, fertility, performance enhancement, etc. So they're not situations that you want just like approximations, right? You want this precision collection, the precision analytics, and precision tracking. Now, here's one of the other problems that arises with the collection of blood is something called hemolysis. So it's one of the biggest issues in blood collection, and this can happen with venous blood too. Hemolysis happens when red blood cells break apart. And when those cells rupture, they release a substance into the sample that can interfere with the laboratory measurements. Finger prick samples are more prone to hemolysis than venous samples because you have to squeeze the finger, right? So when you milk the finger and push blood out, they handle like the sample can be contaminated, right? It can collect too slowly. You can squeeze the finger and get too much interstitial fluid and cause this hemolysis issue to happen. And all of these things increase the likelihood of that cell damage. And once the sample quality starts deteriorating, then so does the confidence in the results. Not to mention shipping problems as well. Shipping it in the mail. If you think about what happens after you collect the sample, you stick it in a package in your mailbox or, drop it off at a mailroom. And then maybe it gets in a truck in a warehouse. Maybe it gets thrown on an airplane, gets exposed to heat, cold. It can get delayed. And the thing is, like, more of a standardized venous draw typically doesn't operate this way, especially if you're doing it at a lab. Traditional blood draw gets processed typically more rapidly under controlled conditions. And in the packaging, you stabilize it under temperature control with an ice pack. And usually they're sent out, next day FedEx, UPS, that type of thing. And the thing is, some biomarkers with blood are very stable and others are not. Hormones, for example, can degrade very easily. And it can be much less reliable when you have results. So it's not that every result can be wrong with the venous blood. It's just that, every additional variable can decrease your confidence in those results. So why this matters for testosterone, for example, which a lot of people care very much about, hopefully, especially as you age and you're wanting to optimize some of the most important hormones when it comes to your performance, health, recovery. If a guy tells me he did a finger prick hormone test and the testosterone came back low, we're not typically making clinical decisions on this, right? Not because I think it's worthless, because you need confirmation and standardization. So if you're talking about like testosterone replacement therapy, performance, recovery, muscle gain, libido improvements, body comp, I want a properly collected venous sample. I want markers like total testosterone, free testosterone, sex hormone binding globulin, estradiol. I want a CBC, a comprehensive metabolic panel, a lipid panel, like ideally a more comprehensive lipid panel with ApoBs and Lp(a)s. I want metabolic testing that's accurate, A1Cs, fasting insulin, fasting blood sugar. I want PSA, prostate-specific antigen, right? Thyroid hormone markers, IGF-1, right? Insulin-like growth factor, and so on and so forth. So the whole picture, in other words, because hormones don't exist in isolation. Don't forget, the body is a whole ecosystem. And I think this is the challenge when a lot of people are getting blood work done, is they don't realize that their biomarkers they're getting at a typical physical. And I've talked about this before on past episodes, is like the typical 19 biomarker physical is pretty pathetic when it comes to deciding how healthy you are. And I can't tell you the amount of people that have said, oh, I got my lab results and my doctor said I'm good. Oh, did someone walk you through the results? No, they just sent me a letter. Or no, they just told me it was fine. And then they send it to me, and it's not only a very minimal amount of actual biomarkers, but some of those markers are actually not even that good. Regarding functional levels versus, a typical, more broad lab level, or, compared to standard American level. So, that's another limitation of many of those at-home tests, is they're measuring just a tiny piece of the puzzle. And you really need to be seeing the entire picture, especially if you want true optimization. So here's the question I always ask is like, what decision are you trying to make? If you're just simply curious and you want, some data to see what's up, a finger prick test might be fine. If you want to start there, at least give you some data, at least throw your hat in the ring, start to measure some things, check it out. The barrier of entry is very low as far as like the discomfort of having to actually get a sample to a lab and get results. But if you're looking for broader trends, if you're looking for broad trends, that may be fine, right? But if you're wanting to get like an actual understanding of where your physiology stands, right? If you are symptomatic, especially, if you're starting to have lower performance at the gym, your body composition is changing, but nothing else has changed in your life. Your energy levels are dropping. Your libido is starting to sag. Your sleep's getting disrupted, that kind of stuff. Okay. So, you definitely want to get better data, and better data comes better testing. So, my philosophy with weaponized wellness that we talk about all the time is making decisions based on objective data. But here's what you have to understand is not all data is created equal. And when people hear like data driven, they assume that a number comes from a lab and it must be accurate, but it's not true, right? The quality of the decision is directly tied to the quality of the information. For example, if you're trying to navigate the ocean, right, or a Great Lake, do you want a rough estimate of where you are, or do you want like targeted GPS coordinates, right? Obviously, people generally would choose precision if they're going to make very important decisions. So, and especially when it comes to your health, right? You want to make sure that you trust the actual data and the numbers that you're getting because the stakes are high, right? So, listen, this is a short episode, but I thought it would be powerful because I do see a lot of these companies that are marketing convenience, and they're marketing like these at-home tests that are like cheaper, and you don't have to go to a lab, you don't have to get venous blood drawn, you don't have to use needles. But the thing is, like, convenience is not the same thing as accuracy. I'll say that again. Convenience is not the same as accuracy, right? Finger prick testing has a place, I believe, for certain biomarkers, for screening, for accessibility, trend tracking. That can be useful, right? But when it comes to specifically like hormones, performance, longevity, making major health decisions, right? Venous blood is the gold standard for a reason. It's to collect the most accurate data possible. Because when you have accurate information, you can make better decisions. And when you make better decisions, you get better outcomes. And I assume, especially if you're listening to this podcast, better outcomes is what you're after. So I appreciate you listening to this episode. Like I said, it was a quick hit. I thought it'd be a powerful episode for people to like understand, at least primitively, the differences between like capillary collection, like a superficial, blood spot, or like a finger prick test versus like a venous blood. What's the difference? Why is one versus the other? And like I said, I'm not against at-home testing. It has its place for a few biomarkers, but a full picture, like what we offer as far as our VIP customized panel at Weaponized Wellness, you're definitely going to want to do like a venous draw. So if you're interested in, doing a venous draw, look me up, go to weaponizedwellness.com or the Weaponized Dad on Instagram, shoot me a DM. We can schedule a discovery call. I can chat with you about, any of your questions about, lab, blood draws, about biomarkers, about any symptoms you're struggling with, etc. And help you understand what's worth measuring, and help you build a strategy on real data. So until next time, everybody, thanks for listening. I appreciate all of you, and I'll check you guys out on the next episode.